Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 142. Good Yud Tes, Lashon Teva, Belimad Chassidus, Ubedarkei Chassidus, Tikoseva v'sichosemu. That's the language that the Rebbe writes at the end of Hayom Yom, Yud Tes Kislev, as we go into Yud Tes Kislev. But interestingly, in a number of times when the Rebbe said it by Fabrengens and other times, he used the word not limud achsidus, he said beteres achsidus, and sometimes said tikosev v'sichosem in the singular, not in the plural. Now Yud Yontiv Lashon Teva beteres achsidus or bedarkei achsidus. So darkei achsidus is always the same, but beteres achsidus and limud achsidus, one way it's printed, and the Rebbe said it often, the word teres achsidus. Obviously, we can sit and emphasize what the difference is between the two. But bottom line is that we're in Yud Tes, that 218 years ago, the Alter Rebbe was released from prison in the year Tov Kuf Nun Tes, the Hebrew year, and is seen by Chassidim as the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, as the Rebbe Rashab in Tofri Samagimel writes his famous letter, Zeh Yem Tchilas Ma'asecha, that this is the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, and therefore the Lashon Teva that we just greeted each other with. And that is that this is the beginning, like a Rosh Hashanah, of the Torah of Chassidus and the Darkei Chassidus, which is the paths of Chassidus, Chassidish traditions, Chassidish behavior, Chassidish drachim, and then the life of living like a chassid, not just as a Torah, as a study, but also the hanhagis and the behavior and lifestyle. And as such, this is a day that has become known as the opening day, which is also why the Shiurim and Tanya begin. From the beginning of Tanya, we start learning Tanya anew every year, Yud Tes Kislev. And the holiday also goes, Yom Tov goes, Yud Tes and Chof Kislev, because Chof Kislev was another day, because it took a few more hours until the Alter Rebbe actually got back to his home, due to the different circumstances that took place. So, obviously, we owe this entire program owes great debt, all debt. There would be no program like this, Chassidus Applied, MyLife, Chassidus Applied, were not for Yud Tes Kislev. So Yud Tes Kislev is our Rosh Hashanah. It's all of our Chassidim Rosh Hashanah, but a Rosh Hashanah particularly of this entire program, which is focused on taking Chassidus, applying it. With that, I'd like to mention, someone asked me the question, applied Chassidus, isn't all Chassidus supposed to be applied? Why are you calling it applied Chassidus? Well, exactly right. We're not doing any chiddush here. We're just doing what should be done, which is taking chassidus and applying it. Someone had suggested, why don't you call it living chassidus? So good points. This is just a man-made name, but the emphasis, however, being that we should and we need to apply chassidus. You can look chassidus in a way that's not applied. You can look chassidus in a way that is applied. The kavanah, of course, is from the beginning, from the Alter Rebbe through all the generations, was meant that it should be applied. As I said, darkei chassidus, not just teres chassidus or limud chassidus. So, with that said, let's talk a bit about Yud Tes Kislev, and of course the entire program is really all about Yud Tes Kislev, about Chassidus, but specifically Yud Tes Kislev, and a question that was asked was to give somewhat of an overview of the last 218 years. We know it's 7 generations from the Alter Rebbe through the Rebbe, and each generation, of course, had its own unique contributions, all accumulatively, going from the Alter Rebbe to the Rebbe. And yet, there are stages that we clearly identify, especially now in retrospect, that really enrich the entire experience by appreciating what Chassidus is. Now, it's a different world today we live in than it was in the time of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe lived in a world which was called the Old World, which was a world that was very insulated and very secluded in many ways. So though the Alter Rebbe spread Chassidus, and the spreading of the well springs outward was something that the Baal Shem Tov heard from the Mashiach himself. But the question, what chutzah meant then and what chutzah means today, is very different. Chutzah then, as the Tzemach Tzedek writes in his Rishimis, in his gloss and commentaries on Tehillim, is called Yal Eir, he says chutzah midas legabe meichen is chutzah, because meichen is more pnimi. And when you mamshech your midas into your meichen into midas, the intellect into emotions, you're already the ma'anesecha of the mind to the chutzah of the midas. If you continue from there, if you go to malchus of atzilus, malchus is chutzah compared to midas. Biyah misham yaparad is chutzah compared to atzilus. So chutzah is a relative term. Anything that is an outer dimension from a previous dimension, you can call outward. But the Rebbe used an expression that he introduced was chutzah she'ein chutzah mimenu. That takes it to another dimension. Chutzah means there's nothing more, the outskirts, nothing more outside than this outside. Meaning to the farthest outskirts of the world, and both qualitatively and quantitatively. Now this was not even possible or doable in the time of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe lived in a community. He reached many Yidden, Chassidim, but it was very limited. There was no technology. There was no real travel. It was all within that world. There is a famous story in Tov Shin Mem that when they used to sell the mitzvahs every Shabbos Bereshis, after Simchas Torah, they would sell the mitzvahs of the year by the Farbrengen. Usually, but after the Rashi Sikha, after the questions on Rashi, the Rebbe would usually be looking in the Sefer, and the Gabbai, first Rabbi Yechanan Gordon, and later Rabbi Shia Pinson, both all of us Shalom, would, and then later Rabbi Shimon Pinson, he was all the way till Tov Shin Beis, sell the mitzvahs. And the custom was they put on a streimel and say a dvar Torah or a story. That year, Tov Shemem, Simchas Torah, I remember, Rabbi Pinson got up and there was a new sefer had come out then called Migdalez from Rabbi Munshine. And in it was a new story that was not known until then, or at least not known by everybody. And that when they first made the maps, the first maps that were drawn by navigators, obviously were not drawn through satellite and were perfect, but they were drawn by people who traveled around the world, and based on their travels, they were able to make estimated maps of mapping out. And the New World, of course, America was just then being mapped out, because even though there were already navigators that went there, beginning in 1492, Columbus, but the first maps came to the time of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe saw a map of America. It says, he pointed that there's a mistake in the map. They asked him, how could he know there's a mistake? He was never there. So he said, Istakel ba'araiso bara alma. You look in Torah, which is a blueprint of the world and existence. And based on that, he sees in Torah that there's a mistake there. Rarely did the Rebbe ever comment. And here, without looking up from the Siddur or the Chumash, the Rebbe commented, und der Iker is, abeshas mekummt in Amerika, so man nicht machen kintas. And the main thing is that when you come to America, you shouldn't make a mistake. So we remember then all wondering what exactly that meant. But the Pashas meant, the Alter Rebbe saw the Lamata from a bird's eye view of the Torah sees, they saw a mistake. So when you come to America and you're here, and you can make a mistake that you shouldn't align yourself to Torah, like the Frierdiker Rebbe said, America is nicht anders, the ikar that here shouldn't be a mistake. So the Alter Rebbe had an impact, I'm sure, on the entire world, but it was an Amalmai Lamata from above down. The effort, as the Rebbe made the big revolution when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America in 1940, the Rebbe followed suit just a year and a half later. That changed, that Chassidus became to Chatzi Kadra Tachten. So in Chassidus, there's a famous letter from the Rebbe from the Frierdiker Rebbe to the Rebbe, when it says in the Maimorim that Matan Torah was not in Chatzi Kadra Tachten. Matan Torah was not in the lower hemisphere. What does that mean? Matan Torah, of course, was everywhere. So he says, but Goli, it was more effective in the hemisphere of Israel, as Yisrael is. So Chatzi Kadra Tachten has a particular stage of development, which really began in 1940. We're talking now 77 years ago, 76, 77 years ago. 218 years ago, Yud Tes Kislev, as much as like the Rebbe Rashab says in Teira Shalom, as Ichkler, he says, I assume, which became more than an assumption, is a fact, that the ikar of your Futzah Menesecha Chutzah began Yud Tes Kislev. That Chutzah and the Chutzah that came years later was very, very different. So if you put it into stages, what happened essentially is, which is exactly as the Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, that when your well springs will spread outward, the outward began to grow and expand like concentric circles, with the Alter Rebbe doing his job, then the Mittler Rebbe in his way, the Cheves Hanor of Bina, Tzemach Tzedek, who accumulated even more Chassidim and drew it out even further, the Rebbe Marash in his way, the Rebbe Rashab establishing Temchet Mimim, which of course added a whole new stage and a whole new age and a whole new stage in the process, establishing a yeshiva that was its Indian is to be the Yitzhak Melchamas Beis David, that should fight the war of Charfu Evecha Hashem and Charfu Ikfus Mishichecha, the challenge to bring godliness in a world that would become more increasingly assimilated. And of course, as the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America in 1930 at a visit, but 1940 permanently, and then the Rebbe, you see literally this expansion. And in retrospect, it's just an amazing thing that 218 years later, who would have imagined? Should we be sitting now with the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe and be able to compare notes? You see how Chassidus prevailed. Yad Chassidim al Aliyena not just prevailed, but expanded in ways that no one could have imagined. And what's even more fascinating is look how the Eibishter made it, that technology and the means of travel and communications and all that allows for the perpetuation of a message. And information also grew in the process. Within the last years alone, especially after Gimel Tammuz, the internet, and other methods that are just continuing to accelerate, literally the fulfillment of that breakthrough in Yud Tes Kislev, Rosh Hashanah, when it broke through, that's when it began. The Yefutzim and the the primary spreading and dissemination and distribution of the wellsprings outward to the farthest outskirts. So when you think about it, Yud Tes Kislev takes on a whole other dimension. And especially now we also see, in the later years, the Rebbe began also talking about the Yud Tes Kislev, the letter from the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchever. So but the focus always was on the letter, was that in Kishe Karisi, when I read Alter Rebbe says, in the Shir Yemi, it was a Tuesday, the Pasuk Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, that's when I was redeemed and Yotzim, and he went out from the Meiser, from the prison. But the second part of the letter talks about the impact that it had, Alter Rebbe says, on Kol Ha'amim V'Kol Ha'umis, on the nations of the world. Hifli V'Higdu, they all wondered, look what happened here. Now, the effect it had then, Alter Rebbe says it had an effect, so it definitely had an effect. But the Rebbe began talking about, especially in the mid-Lameds and the Mems, and accelerated, that Yud Tes Kislev Chassidus is not just for the community, and it's not just for the Jewish community. It's actually to transform the world, to bring the Geula. Exactly what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov. The Geula is a Geula for Kol Ha'elam Kuleh, for the entire world. So all this is Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, Yud Tes Kislev begins. Now there's so much to talk about Yud Tes Kislev. I thought that this would be appropriate to put it in, to give us some type of panorama of events, and especially now we look in retrospect and we see literally the expansion exactly in that direction. Of course, the translation of Chassidus that the Rebbe always focuses on and emphasizes, and the bringing of Chassidus into language that people, all of us, can understand, appreciate, and live by, which is, of course, applied Chassidus. And as I said, this is the 142nd episode, direct outgrowth of the kavanah of what the Rebbe taught us, to take Chassidus and make it make it totally relevant to our personal lives. And it goes back to this Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus that we're celebrating tonight, the 218th anniversary, and tomorrow, and Chof Kislev, in this Chassidish month of Kislev. And of course, the Heirab Apel, the directive Apel, is that we have before us the treasures. The Alter Rebbe compares it to the Even Yukara, the most precious stone in the king's crown, that in order to save the child, the king is ready to sacrifice. So it's the most precious stone in Teda itself, Primus Teda. And in that itself, this continued expansion as I described. So our message is, firstly, is to passionately recommit and rejuvenate our connection to Chassidus. L'shana Teva, it should be a good year in Teres Chassidus or Limud Chassidus and Darkei Chassidus. And we should be sealed, and we should be written and sealed for that. That requires our commitment that on this day we should all make a Rosh Hashanah commitment. Rosh Hashanah is the Reish for the entire year. With it leads everything else, everything follows. As Chassidus says, the Reish is not just the head of the year, it's the central nervous system that controls every detail of the year. That we should commit on this day to revolutionize our learning of Chassidus and our application of it, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our families, and not just for our families, but also for our communities, and not just for our communities, for our cities and states and countries, and reaching Higdal V'Hifli, all nations of the world, because at the end of the day, Chassidus teaches the inner soul and the neshama of all morality and all ethics, and it's a tremendous psychological blueprint of how a person can live to the fullest of fulfilling the purpose for which they were created, which is to make a dira b'tachtenim, each person in their own way. Jews through their Torah mitzvahs, and the non-Jews through tzedek v'yesher, through justice and kindness, the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neach, and creating the Shevis Yitzhar, a civilized world. But it's not civilized world is infused not just with the commitment to morality, but also, as we will say, that it's connected to the divine within it. As the Rebbe always emphasizes, that ethics has no bedrock and no foundation if you don't start with Anochi Hashem Elokecha, God. As this country, in God we trust. That is God that gives us these rights, and these are God-given, endowed rights that each of us has and has to protect and cherish. It's not up to the whims of human beings. And the same thing is, we see even by Vayeshev Mismei Ne'er, the Rambam, end of chapter 8 of Hilchos Malachim, says not just they should do ethics and be moral, but based on what was given at Har Sinai. Why is it negay Har Sinai? Because the connection to God is the key. And where do you see the connection to God in Torah itself more than Chassidus? That's what Chassidus is, Da'as Elokei Avicha, to know your God. Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, in Kuntas Achron. So obviously when you learn Gemara and you learn Chumash, you also talk about God. But the focus of chesed Yovel Avosei L'Yosei, how do you come to love and feel awe for the divine, is by learning about the divine. And that is applicable to all people of the earth, as the Rebbe explains in a number of sikhs, to all people. Because you're talking about accessing the soulfulness and the spirituality of a human being, that they should live a transcendent life, not driven by materialism and indulgence in our immediate needs, but by the transcendent needs of bringing the divine and divine light into this world. And this is Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus on all levels. So each person according to their level. Obviously, Bochum Yeshiva, it's about learning Chassidus and Kochazich and Chassidus and turning it into a practical Avedis and Avedis Atfilah and Kima Mitzvahs Behidur and so on. For Younger Light and for people, each person in their world, where they are, what sphere of influence they have to do it in their way. Shluchim, who are out there, they have their role. Each of us has to look at Yud Tes Kislev as a source of inspiration, a source of energy, like Rosh Hashanah, to do our role in fulfilling the mission. And what more inspiring to look back 218 years and see it's living, it's growing, it's spreading. We have the doctrine. No one's asking us for more doctrine. We have the Rabbeim gave us the doctrine, 7 generations of Chassidus. We have everything we need. What we need now is the Pirush Rashi and the Teisvus and the interpretations and the applications, in the sense of explaining it in a way that we can relate to it in the most personal fashion. That's up to us. So that's a Yud Tes Kislev message. Now I want to add one more thing. It says in the Sikha from Simchas Torah Tov Reish, Yud Tes Kislev Tov Reish Samach Zayin, which would be 110 years ago. So the Frierdiker Rebbe brings in the Sikha, the Rebbe brings it, cites it in Vayishlach Tovshin Mem Zayin, which is 30 years ago, that Yud Tes Kislev is the tikkun of Shviras HaKelim. Now you think about it 1 second. Yud Tes Kislev we know is the Gili of Chassidus. We know there was a kitrug in heaven, there was a so-called complaint or challenge in heaven, whether this is the time to spread Chassidus the way the Alter Rebbe was spreading it. That we know. Suddenly a tikkun of Shviras HaKelim we know is connected not just to Eden, it's connected to the whole Birra Elam, refinement of the world. What's Shviras HaKelim? We learned the last week at the end of Parsha Vayishlach, and that's the connection. Yud Tes Kislev is always in the Parsha Vayishlach, Vayeshev, these weeks, that the Vayimlach Vayomos, by the 7 kings of Edom, the children and offspring of Esav, and how they ruled and died. This Kabbalah, based on that, is Shviras HaKelim, Vayomos. Misa, it refers to the breaking of the shattering of the containers. And Yud Tes Kislev is the tikkun. And if you think about it, Vayeshev, what does Rashi say right in the beginning of this week's Parsha? And here's the connection to Vayeshev. Rashi says, after we just read about the Alufe, about the ministers and all the leaders that were the pedigree of Esav, now we read the pedigree and the offspring of Yaakov, which is the Ikid. And he gives the example there of the Margolius and the sand and so on. So what's the connection? Why do we need to know about the sand? Because Birra Elam is the Birra of the entire world. It's not just about Yaakov. We also have to refine and ultimately elevate Esav. And Edom is Golus. Edom is this last Golus. And as we learned in Rashi last week's Parsha, that at the end of the day there'll be Vayisla Hashem Alucha Lishpit al Har Esav. V'olam Meshiyim B'Had Sina Lishpit as Har Esav. That there will be Har Esav and Vayisla Hashem Alucha, the end of the Haftarah of last week's chapter from Avadia. As the Gemara talks about why Dafka Avadia said this Haftarah, because transformation has to come from within. The handle of the axe, the handle of the axe is required to knock down the tree. You need the tree itself, the wood of the tree, which is the handle of the axe. So all this emphasizes what Yud Tes Kislev comes to accomplish, the end of the process of Birur Shviras HaKelim. So you see there, it's far greater than just for Chassidim and for Eden. So when the Alter Rebbe, Yud Tes Kislev, maybe then they didn't fully appreciate it, even though the Alter Rebbe wrote it in his letter. But today we do. So our job is world transformation. So Yud Tes Kislev is a global Yom Tov in that sense, a global day that has Rosh Hashanah, that gives us the power for all the work we have to do in transforming this world and preparing it finally for the Gula, which is right on the threshold, as we're told, that all the work has been done. And the Birur is finished. That's why the Rebbe said in Vayeshev, Tov Shinun Beis, which would be 25 years ago this week. 25 years ago, right? 25 years ago, the famous sikha that I've chazed many times, why the Alter Rebbe opposed Napoleon from winning, because he felt even though it would be better for the Gashmis of Eden, they'd be more prosperous, but the Ruchnis would be compromised, the spiritual would be compromised. Whereas Alexander of Russia winning would make it a lot lower, a lot more challenging, Gashmis physically and materially and financially, but Yoram Keren Yisrael, the crown, the shining crown of Israel, their pride, their spiritual life would be intact. But now we've come to the point where it's already the end of the process. Now today we can enter the Western world of Edom. And not just Edom of Russia Edom, but the French Edom. The Western Edom of enlightenment and of emancipation and all the challenges that come with prosperity. And still transform it all. So Yud Tes Kislev now takes on a whole another dimension in that context. I hope I did some justice to this, but it's important to understand what we have, the gift that we are having, and the honor, the honor and the merit we have to be soldiers in this type of army, aware of this mission, which all of us are messengers of. Every 7 billion people on this earth. But those that were blessed to be aware of it, it's an unbelievable blessing because we have a responsibility to share with everyone what this special day is and the power of the day. Okay. With that, I want to go right into something which is, I think, very appropriate, is something we began around a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. A question asking, what are the 3 greatest challenges facing our community today? And we especially waited till Yud Tes Kislev to gather together and give you the consensus of what has come in so far. You still have an opportunity to answer that question if you haven't done so. But let's begin. Yud Tes Kislev is a time, we said, practical and applying chesed to life, right? To living chesed, which is Yud Tes Kislev. What better way is by looking at what are the challenges we have and see where chesed, what chesed offers as a response. But yediyas hamachle chesed refuah. Knowing awareness of a problem is have the cure. Shailas chochem chesed tshuva. The question of a wise person is half an answer. So the first thing is we have to diagnose and give a sense of what is the problem, then you can define it. And as the Mittler Rebbe says, to truly appreciate and truly be effective, it can't just be as bonus klolis. He says this at the beginning of Shari Yichud. It can't just be a general contemplation, you have to get into details. Diagnoses have to be detailed. You can't just say, I don't feel good, or I feel good. Where exactly, what area? So let me share a consensus of what has come in, and we got many, many responses. I don't even know the number. But here are in top, I'm not going to go through all of them because we have limited time, but in the next few weeks I will go through all of them from top to bottom. I'm going to do is now the top 3 that most people voted for being, well, we didn't even make a multiple choice. We let people write in anonymously what they suggested, and these are the top 3 answers that the most people said are the most critical challenges in our community today. For the record, to be able to submit something, just go to meaningfullife.com/MyLife, and there's a forum, and anonymously you can submit your own 3 top challenges. And so here they are. Number 1. So over the past month, MyLife has posed a question to the public, asking people to identify the 3 greatest challenges facing our community today. We have received much feedback from our listeners, And now we will share the intriguing responses that have come in with the obvious objective to explore ways of resolving these issues. Okay. So, number one, lack of unity and vision in leadership. And here there were at least 10 or 15 people saw this as the first issue. And it was worded different ways by different people. The lack of unity and vision among the leadership of Anash, Achdus among Chabad leadership, Shluchim and Anash, a strong, healthy Lubavitcher Bezdin. The Rebbe's instructions regarding leadership after Gimel Tammuz are not well known and most importantly are not followed. Lack of unity of Rabbanim because really everything in the Jewish community emanates from there. Leadership in Chabad on personal level, Rabbanim and Mashpiyim on communal level, real leadership and on international level as well, have panel of Das Torah from all countries that give binding guidance. Disrespect of Rabbanim, lack of a unified Bezdin, lack of holy leadership. It seems so many are corrupt or worse, or in some other way, simply not the kind of leadership we used to have in previous generations. I'm reading them uncensored exactly as people wrote them. So that was one big issue. The second issue that received the most so-called comments, and again, this is by no means scientific, by no means accurate necessarily, but if you take a cross-section, these are the responses that came. Number two was issues regarding education systems. And here some people wrote a little longer. I'm not going to go read the entire letters, but basically talking about people's experience in our chinuch, in our meisdis chinuch. Some write about the indignities that they experienced in our education systems. Some talk about the lack of a solid education that really empowers somebody from the point of view of Torah and Chassidus to really go out and use their skills to spread Yiddishkeit. Some talk about the lack of really learning Chassidus properly and only knowing it academically at best, but not knowing how to apply it. The absence of a cohesive educational system that is affordable and that is successful with all of our youth. So affordability. Education is being a dugma chaya for our children, a living example. Girls chinuch. That the girls' school need to up their game in limud and chassidus. This person writes, we are losing our girls, but I believe that we wouldn't if limud chassidus and darkei chassidus were presented properly. I'm not sure why you're saying girls more than the boys, but fine, that's this person's opinion. Learning and being careful with halacha, not just chassidus itself. And major problem that you don't find in the zals, in the yeshivas, the people that go out of the way to care for the students. They just wait for a bocher to come to them, to the anhola for guidance, rather than approach and show that type of care. Some also talk about really dealing with empowering people to be able to have a job. Okay, we talked about this secular education. One can say that's an issue, or it's not an issue. So this is a summation of number two. And number three, gap between shluchim and non-shluchim, general lack of equality. And here the bullets, the different comments made, lack of unity in Avos Yisrael. Chabad is a class society, not talking about shidduchim, just everyday derech eretz and respect being shown to those who may be newcomers. At least in my community, the arrogance from those that are so-called insiders is palpable. Okay. So, and let's see what else. Equality. Yes, about equality. Again, lack of achdus. The distancing of the shlichus apparatus from rank and file anash. We're right now spelling out, as I said, issues that are challenges without necessarily suggesting solutions. I've talked about some of these topics, but that will reserve for another time. So these are the three top ones. There's a whole bunch of other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Another 14, but they came in a lower rung, meaning people didn't see them as these top, or less people, I should say, saw them as important. So if I didn't mention something, does not mean that it's not important. It just means that the number that people who responded to these three, and they listed them as the most significant. And let this be a provocation and an invitation to all of you to perhaps weigh in. You can weigh in and say, you don't think these are the three. There should be something else. Why was this not mentioned, that mentioned? That's the whole point of this conversation. And I hope can engage as many people as possible because, as I said, this is the way you solve problems. You talk about them. You don't talk about them just to talk, obviously. You talk about them by articulating what we see in our own personal lives, in our synagogues, in our shuls, in our schools, in our communities, in our families. What are the challenges? And I have not weighed in here in what I would say, based on my own experiences, because I really want to hear it from everybody together. And I don't think anyone has a monopoly on this, including myself, in saying these are the issues. There are people who have tremendous issues at home and family, which was not really mentioned here. And that could be the most significant issue of all. Others don't have that issue, either because they're beyond that age and their children are already out of the home, or because they didn't have those issues. I mean, so this has a lot of subjectivity to it as well. But I am very gratified, not because I want to hear problems out, frankly, or challenges, but gratified to see many, many people have weighed in. And of course, what I'm going to try to do is consolidate, talk about some more things, and then, of course, the next question is going to be, what do we do about it in each particular case? And I really believe that that's our Aveda and Shlichus. Go back to Yud Tes Kislev. What is Yud Tes Kislev today, if not that? If not taking the issues that we're challenged with and looking at Chassidus, looking at Hagdom and Tanya that we begin reading in the next days because of the Chitas, the beginning of Tanya, that Tanya came to address the problems of our communities, the problems in people's lives, the challenges we have. And it has the answers. And if you don't find the answer, he says, go to the Gedalim Shabi'ir, to the leaders. I speak about the mature people in each community, the emotionally mature people. Which leads me, so we'll stop here. We're going to go over more of them in the coming weeks. And again, please submit your suggestions or comments or rebuttals at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where you'll have the forum. You can submit in any anonymous fashion, which is also a platform where you can ask any question, make any comment, and it's all your privacy is completely protected from all of us because none of us know where it's coming from. It's a completely anonymous forum. Okay. With that, I want to mention something I should have mentioned earlier. Now it's 40 years since Yud Tes Kislev, Tov Shel Lamed Zayin. And two big things that the Rebbe said that in the Fabringen was Mashpim, and number two was about Ayin Beis. And one Sikha followed the next. Mashpim, I recommend, this is Yud Tes Kislev, 40 years, it says Koi Inush Adaita de Rabbe. 40 years, we begin to appreciate, a student begins to fully appreciate, or to somewhat appreciate in a new dimension, the teacher. Maybe it's high time that we look at that Sikha. And the mashpiyim is something that every one of us can implement. Read the Sikha, how the Rebbe says, everybody. Mashpiyah does not mean necessarily over 1,000 people and over 5 people. It could be one person that you serve as a mashpiyah to, that responds to you, or that you respond to that mashpiyah. So this is something all of us can implement. And frankly, when you look at those Sikhs, Yud Tes Kislev, and the follow-up, Bakosha Nafshis from the Rebbe. Request from his heart and soul. People want to know what the Rebbe wants. You could say, 1 second, didn't the Rebbe say now we have to bring Mashiach? You have no question. You can imagine that Mashpiyim are relevant to that, to be more objective, to understand what to focus on, to give us the strength. So the Mashpiyim Heirav, that Yud Tes Kislev 40 years ago, is something that should be and can be applied by each and to each one of us. That's one thing. And the Ayin Beis, of course, was when the Rebbe said he's throwing out Ayin Beis to the Chassidim. Of course, the kavanah is to learn it. In it, it's deep Chassidus, but it's Chassidus. And Chassidus, Osi Mardo Malka Mashiach, comes through your Futzah Manesecha Chutza. And Ayin Beis, the Rambam of Chassidus, gathers together all of Chassidus. So Yud Tes Kislev and Ayin Beis go hand in hand, as demonstrated by the Rebbe then, giving it out, announcing it, that Yud Tes Kislev. So those are two things among many others, I'm sure, if you read the Fabringen of that year. And that's definitely something worthwhile doing, because what better way to honor Yud Tes Kislev? Listen to the Rebbe's words himself. Not me, not anyone else. You can listen to Mashpim, Fabring, it's all beautiful. But to hear the Rebbe's words, I guarantee you we'll all hear something that we can take to heart and actualize and bring into action. So let's move to some other topics, all obviously related to Chassidus. And we'll begin with a few new ones, and then I'll do some feedback. Here's the next one. If God failed me, why should I trust in Him? I know we are supposed to believe that God's reasonable reasoning supersedes our understanding. And there's a master plan that's beyond us. But if my greatest fear is suffering, and all I keep getting is more suffering, then God's greater plan is totally meaningless to me. It eludes me. Why can't it simply be my bad luck and nothing more? As far back as my memory goes, I've always been bullied. Not the kind of bullying that happens in preschool and stops, the kind that follows you into adulthood. Friends, employers, teachers, just about everyone I interact with sees my weakness and takes advantage. I have so much working against me, years of damage from being bullied, a job that's about to be taken from me, a lonely life, and just so much more. Most of my life has been learning to try and deal with this suffocation. God clearly failed me. So why should I trust in Him? The letter is a far longer one and elaborates about this whole bullying. The topic of bullying I've addressed in the past. So I'm not going to read the entire letter, but I gave you the gist of it. So my heart goes out. It's a very sad letter. It makes you cry about a person who suffered on this level. And I want you to know, whoever wrote it, that I did read it from beginning to end. I'm not going to read it on the air here. Firstly, it's too long. Not that it's too long to hear your suffering, but it's just going to, I think most people will not want to continue to hear it at the length of it. So I'd rather just keep it summed up, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable to be read and valuable to be heard. So I did read it, and my comments are going to include commenting to things you've written that I may not have read here on here. So after my introduction that my heart goes out to you or to anyone that has such a question, and there are people who have that question of despair and giving up. I'm saying, since God did not fail me, why, how can I trust in Him? Well, I'll just say this. The people who have suffered most in this world need God more than anybody does. Human beings are very unreliable. I mean, we wish we had friends and family that we can fully connect to. But there's nothing like connecting to God, because that is ultimately the invincible power that gives us the ability to rise above any challenge in life. I don't know if I ever shared the story, but I remember in a class I gave a number of years ago, many years ago. I was giving the class down on 81st Street and West End Avenue. At the end of the class, I remember two young women came over to me, and one of them, from the distance, had very, I could see like a very elegant face. As they came closer, I saw that her face was reconstructed, of no better way of putting it. And she shares with me. She shares with me that I was one of the students who was in Israel, in Ben Yehuda, when that second intifada began. There was a lot with the suicide bombings in restaurants and in cafes. So one was in Ben Yehuda on a Friday afternoon, and I was sitting waiting for a friend when a bomb exploded in a suitcase and killed. There were many casualties. And she put it very straightforward. She said, my face was blown off. I didn't know if I was going to live. Ended up in a hospital. And I lost my hearing. I lost my face. I lost my smell and some other senses. My parents did not know I was in Israel because they weren't very happy that I went. So I told them I was going to Europe and the Middle East. Didn't say where. Where did they find out I'm in Israel? Is when they saw me on CNN covered in blood. So of course they came flying, and they did not carry it against me because I was fighting for my life. This is what she's telling me. And she says that I came to study in a school here, in a yeshiva. That's why I didn't want to tell my parents, because they didn't agree. They wouldn't have agreed. I came here to study God's Torah, and this is what God does to me. That's my thoughts I had in the hospital. And the pain was so horrendous because of everything that I was going through, that I really asked God to just take my life. Why did he leave me like this, like a completely, like a rag, like a broken shard? No dignity left, no face left, no beauty left, nothing. And she said, months passed, and one morning I woke up, the sun was shining from the window, and I suddenly had this surge of power and energy that made me feel, and I felt, I want to live, and I'm going to fight to live. And I suddenly had a connection to God that was the exact opposite. After all my anger and all my complaints, I felt that connection. And these are the words that she said that I'll never forget, and I share this right now, these words. You do not know the power of faith in God. You do not know the power of trust in God until you have nothing left but that trust. So I am not in this position. I'm just sharing a story I heard. I remember I was like, it's coming from a person like that. So trust in God is not some type of crutch or some type of escape and say, hey, listen, since God betrayed me or since God failed me, why should I have trust? That's exactly why you need trust. Now, of course, you can blame God for all that's happened. And what are you left with? Okay, you're blaming God, and now you're left with what resources are you left with? What recourse do you have? Who are you going to trust exactly? So we may not know God's mysterious ways, given. And also the fact that people did bad things, as the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKodesh, that they will be punished for what they did. But the fact that it happened to happen to you means that God has a plan we may not understand. And therefore there's no room for anger. But above all, no room for anger at God because we don't know God's plan. Of course we want to have blessings and everything should be revealed and we shouldn't have any of these issues. But the point I'm making here is that for someone who's been bullied, for someone who has so much pain, it is God that is ultimately our salvation. Because that's the power that gives us the ability to not allow humans and other circumstances of life get to us. You're tied above, you don't fall below. I don't know if what I'm saying is reaching the person who's written this letter, and maybe you've heard this, and maybe you'll say, oh, it's more of the same. But I say it from my heart, that's the truth. The power of the trust in God is what gives us the ability to get through the most difficult times. Now, it may sound counterintuitive, because you have to stop blaming God, because blaming God does not help you. Maybe a good scapegoat, but it's not going to help you. You have to not blame anybody. What you have to do is connect yourself to something stronger and find friends that help you connect. Now, it may be that this platform, this forum here, MyLife, is not adequate to really talk about things like this, because I don't believe in talking collectively with one fell swoop, generalizations and platitudes that fit that are for everyone. This is very personal. So if you want to reach out to me personally, I'm happy to talk to you. Not happy, but I'd be honored to do so. That's my name, Simon, Simon, at meaningfullife.com. We can make a time to talk. I don't need to know your name. We could talk by phone. But I really believe that you may need to talk to someone one-on-one and in person. Because what I said is, though I stand by it, and it's the truth because you see it in all of Chassidus and all the letters of the Rebbe, but still, the challenges and the emotional challenges we have, sometimes these words may not be adequate. So I qualify what I'm saying with that. Yet the words may be true, but you have to find in a way that speaks to you and you can do something with it. So again, my heart goes out, but at the same time, there is hope. That's the key. There is always hope. And the hope comes exactly from that, from the neshama that we have in us, the divine neshama and the connection to Hashem. As some Holocaust survivors who told cynics, I said, how could you believe in God after the Holocaust? Their answer was, how could I believe in man after the Holocaust? I have nothing but God left after what humans did to other humans. Okay. With that, let us move to some follow-up. There's some follow-up. So I talked last week about a shidduch, the Rebbe's answer about what's primary and what's not so primary in searching for your soulmate. So here was one comment. I've seen a number of letters from the Rebbe that says that even though we are Chabad, which celebrates mind over heart, the way you feel about your date is different and it should be considered an ikr in your decision and not a toffel. The feeling, now obviously that's the case. What I read last week, the note from the Rebbe, was when he was talking about with the ikr, he said, what it says in Eishes Chayil Isha Yiras Hashem Hitasal, a woman of valor, a woman who has awe and respect of God and is dignified in that sense, is the most important thing of all. Obviously, Midas Tevis, having being kind and warm person, and obviously you have to have being attracted to. The question is that an ikir or is that important? Obviously, if there's no Meshichas Halev, it means your heart is not drawn to that person, as the Rebbe told one of his secretaries when he was dating. Not he asked whether he should get married. He said, should I continue dating? So the Rebbe said, on matters of the heart, not I can help you, not your father could help you, not your mother could help you, not I can help you. Because only you know whether your heart's drawn there. So that's also important. That's not a contradiction to what I said in talking about the qualities that you're looking for in another person. You could have many people that you can be drawn to, or few people, but there's also other qualities that you need. And you could have the qualities, and if you're not drawn to that person, yes, that can be a chesed. I remember Tu B'Av, Tav Shalom Hey, 15th of Av. And of course, that's the day when the Mishnah says that the Bnei Yerushalayim, Bnei Tzion, would go out, and Bnei Yisrael would go out and so-called meet and their potential grooms. And they said, Bocher sona yenecha, Bocher, raise your eyes. And the Rebbe said, we learned two things from this. That before they say it, the Bocher shouldn't be raising his eyes and looking where he shouldn't be looking. But once they say it, a Bocher shouldn't be so shy and so chassidus that he doesn't look, because you have to look and you have to choose someone that you see and that recognize and are drawn to and attracted to. Okay, so that's not a contradiction at all. In that context, there was the next one, because I spoke about the topic of being politically correct and also about shidduchim, so someone asked a question about both things together. Marrying someone with opposite political views. I'm dating someone who has completely different political views than I do. I don't know if I should consider this as something that could jeopardize any future of relationship. We are similar in other ways and I like him, but should I take this difference seriously? The nature of politics usually is one that tears people apart if they can't agree. So I'm left to wonder if our opposite views should be a reason for concern. Different wording. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I watch your weekly classes and enjoy them immensely. Following up on your PC question of last week, I have a question regarding dating and marrying someone with opposite political views. Dating someone who has views in the Democratic left-wing views, voting for Hillary Clinton. And I consider myself politically conservative. I would have been thrilled to vote for Ted Cruz. Well, both of them didn't win, as we know, if he had been nominated. And essentially going the same direction, how will this play itself out in marriage, and should it be an issue? Very good question. And my response is very direct. And if you think about it, very simple in a way. If political views get between two people, then it's an issue. But the bigger question is, should they get between two people? We talked about what's a nikr, what's a tafel. If political views are so strong that a person can get angry at another person because they don't agree with them, then that I would stay away from. There's a big problem with that. Because since when is a marriage based on a person's political views? Why your political view the ikr? The ikr is, do you have a Yiras Shamayim, whether it's a man or Yiras Shamayim, a woman? Isha Tisal, Isha Yiras Hashem Hitisal, as I just mentioned from the Rebbe. A person with good midas, a person that's a partner in your life that you can trust, that you know that whatever comes up in life, and family's challenges and children and so on, you have a partner who you can talk to, a person who's considerate, kind. These are what you should be looking at. If political differences become more important than what I just listed, that I would be very careful of and wonder why. What happened to human beings? Look what's going on today. That's more important than all the fundamentals of menschlichkeit and humans. So I would not say so that political differences is an issue. It shouldn't be an issue. But if it isn't, if someone's making that issue, that's the issue. That's my response. So no, there's nothing wrong with one spouse is more democratic, one is more Republican, one is more pro. This one, since when do spouses have to agree? But if their passionate belief in it is to the extent where they cannot have a civil and decent conversation with someone because what's the matter with you that you don't believe like me, then you're talking about just a hot-headed or strong-headed person. And any matter that has such inflexibility, I would be careful of. Politics is therefore a very good litmus test. As an aside, I can share with you, I give a class every Wednesday night in Manhattan. I mention it sometimes. once in a while, pretty often actually, I could see people dating a couple come to the class. I was wondering, why would they come? They're going on a date. Why are they here at the class? There are other times you can come to the class, get engaged, and then come to the class and learn about marriage. So I asked a few times, and people told me something interesting. They say, your class, you talk about soulful things, spiritual things, and it happens to become a very good and provocative topic. And I right away can know about the person that I'm dating, how they react to these classes and these ideas, because you're not talking about superficial or gossip. How they react is very indicative of what kind of person they are. I was flattered by that. But it's interesting, certain topics, and maybe politics is similar to that, you bring it up, you right away can see what a person is made of. Their adamance and their lack of flexibility and rigidity, etc., etc. So that's my response, that politics should not be an issue. There's nothing wrong with people having different opinions, but if it becomes an issue, that's the issue. I hope I was clear about that. Next topic, follow up. Let me just make sure we have everything here covered here. Good. Okay. Next is Tanya racist? So we talked about the end of chapter 1 of Tanya, which of course is a topic that never goes away, apparently. So here's a few follow-ups that came about this. And let me read them. Yeah. Rabbi Jacobson, thanks so much for your fabulous weekly shiurim. In response to the person who wrote about Tanya being racist. 1. Jews come in all skin colors and ethnicities, and Tanya doesn't differentiate between white Jews, black Jews, Asian Jews, etc. Okay, very good point, which actually emphasizes an element that the Tanya is not talking about nationalism. It's talking about the psychological challenges that people have, and as I said about Goyishkeit versus Yiddishkeit versus typing racial profiling. That's not what the Tanya is coming to do. If you read Tanya, that's completely out of context for someone to take a racial conclusion from that. And your point is very well taken, absolutely. Black Jews, white Jews, Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews. Now the fact that some people discriminate, that has nothing to do with Torah and Chassidus. So that's absolutely right. Very good point. Number 2, from what I've always understood from the end of chapter 1 of Tanya, it is that Jews have the potential to act altruistically while non-Jews don't. I think the novel concept there is that any human can act altruistically, not that non-Jews can't. Thanks so much. Absolutely. Because if you think about it, the Tanya, remember, is not being written to be politically correct. He's writing as it is, and if you don't have any agenda in your mind, like I just spoke about politics, and just learn it as it is, and based on the backdrop that I mentioned about that the Torah is based on that God created every human being in the divine image. If you have that type of clean slate and just take it for what it is, it doesn't have the same implications. The problem is we live in a climate where there is a lot of racial discrimination and profiling and prejudices and racism. So in that type of climate, you're not dealing with a neutral situation. But Tanya didn't come to address a situation based on political considerations. And absolutely. If anything, you could ask the question the other way around. It says in Tanya that the non-Jews do it for ulterior motives. The Rambam Paskins, based on the Gemara, that only Avram did something completely selfless and for no ulterior motives. But everybody does for ulterior motives, either for material gain, spiritual gain, or for some type of agenda, some type of motive. So what is when you say it's chesed lum chatos, and who not? So you have to actually bend backwards the other way to show someone that does some chesed, kindness, for absolutely no ulterior motive. So the Tanya actually begs the question the other way around. The point I'm making here is that all these questions are important to discuss, but he's talking about, as I said, the goyish guy. That's why Chassidim Yisraelim, righteous Gentiles, people who live up to what God wants of them, it doesn't apply to the Tanya. The Tanya is talking about evil nations, or the evilness of the nations of the pagan nations of the world. Second question regarding this follow-up, what happens if a non-Jew does something wrong? Do they have the opportunity to do tshuva? How can they rectify wrong in the context of the 7 Noahide laws? So firstly, absolutely they can do tshuva. There's discussion, what type of tshuva and so on. But everyone can do tshuva. The whole haftarah of Yom Kippur is what? Is about whom? Why did Jonah didn't want to go? Because it was about Nineveh. And it was a call to them to do tshuva, and he didn't want it to reflect badly on the Jewish people. Or the different explanations given there. So tshuva everyone's capable of tshuva, and that's why the Egyptians even were culpable and responsible for their behavior. They did not have to act the way they acted. Two different opinions, the Rambam and the Ravid, whether it meant the general, when the God told Abraham that there'll be a nation that will enslave your children, whether it meant the general nation and no individual was compelled to do so, or they went overboard and did more than they were asked to do. But the point is that everybody can do tshuva, and everybody, and if people are charged with the mission to civilize the world, and they did not, or they don't live up to the 7 others, of course they can do things that will correct their path in that direction. A third question in this regard. Thank you as always. Hi, hello, Rabbi. Thank you as always for your insightful communications. Just as you announced the 144 review, episode 141 review of the Tanya, is Tanya racist topic, I was in the process of beginning to reread the Tanya. I was wondering if I was going to comprehend the end of chapter 1 any differently, any less racist. I am sad to say that it did not soften my feeling much, but perhaps I have a more refined understanding. I wish I had more time to formulate my thoughts and questions, but here it goes. You stated that it is impossible for Tanya to be racist because it starts on the biblical premise that we all created in God's image. Yet our Constitution also starts on the same premise. Nevertheless, we ended up with a country where all men and women, blacks and whites, were not equal. By the same process, it seems that Tanya is stating that by nature, Jews and non-Jews are not created equal. As the end of chapter 1 states, the non-Jewish soul is based in self-interest, ending with a statement that some non-Jews also have elevated souls. It sounds very much like the common statement that I have many Jewish black or other friends. Tanya seems to be relegating these Gentiles to exceptions to the rule. Trying to massage what the Tanya is saying, let me ask this. Is the Alter Rebbe saying that by nature or by nurture, Jews tend to be at more moderated, refined versions of chesed and gvura, whereas Gentiles lean more to the extremes? Clearly, the entire process of developing righteousness gravitates toward an understanding that whatever our nature is, we must endeavor to glean the best combination of chesed and gvura to elevate our souls. I think that Tanya being racist or not hangs on the balance of whether or not it is talking about nature versus nurture. To what degree and how so this is different for Jew and non-Jew. And then this fellow continues to write about another topic, which I'll read at another time. So I stand by what I'm saying. I hear your question, and I understand where it may be coming from. But I think if you look in terms of spiritual growth and spiritual identification, as I said, there is a thing called goyishkeit, not necessarily the individual. They're very refined, tremendously refined. They were and are tremendously refined human beings that are not necessarily Jewish. The Alter Rebbe is not talking, they're not negating that in any way. He's talking about an archetype of the pagan. Remember, Jews were also once non-Jews. Everybody was once Gentile. So it was a nation that came out of nation. Goy Mekerev Goy. And even though before Sinai you can't categorize someone as non-Jew or Jew because you didn't have the concept, but relatively speaking, you have this shift. Whether you would embrace a God and higher values, or we'd be embracing a Gentile pagan archetype, which was self-worship. And that's critical to keep in mind. As far as nurture and nature, absolutely. We said before, a person is all about the choices we make, and you can choose to be a righteous individual, including a righteous gentleman, and have a share in the world to come. So, enough, I think, said on that topic. There was one more follow-up about the Founding Fathers and religion. If you see this letter from Benjamin Franklin, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and the elder statesman sitting at the Constitutional Convention, you can see that while sometimes Benjamin Franklin is sometimes viewed as the least religious founding father, he himself seemed to believe in Ashgacha Pratis, divine providence. And he writes, in the beginning of the contest with Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayers in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard and graciously answered. All of us engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. I have lived a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. From Psalms. I firmly believe this, and I also firmly believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this. That without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. And we ourselves shall become a reproach and a byword down to the future ages. Quote unquote from Benjamin Franklin. I want to add in that context, you mentioned the previous mention about the fact that the Constitution of the United States also began with the premise all men are created equal, and yet they had slavery, but look what happened at the end. They built in those words that ultimately came and defeated the same slave owners that wrote that Constitution and Declaration of Independence. So at the end of the day, it was built on a divine premise, and it was fulfilled. As deplorable as slavery was, it was ultimately abolished with the fights and the wars and all that. So I wanted to add that. Secondly, my friend, Constitution of the United States is not the Torah. It's still man-made. And even that prevailed. How much more so in the Torah that looks to see the benefit and the welfare of mankind in the Messianic times where all people, the business of all people will be to know God. A world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Okay, let us go to the Chassidus Question and then the essays, and we shall conclude this Yud Tes Kislev Yontif, and we can go all Fabreng, all night and all day. Okay. I have seen throughout my learning of Chassidus a reference to Tehillim, Peites Gimel 89.3, which states Olam chesed yibona, that the world was built with chesed. I also remember seeing that each of the 7 midas correspond to the 7 days of creation. It has been a while since I've seen these concepts inside a sefer, and I cannot remember exactly where I saw them. So here's my question. Can you please elaborate on how Chassidus explains Olam chesed yibona, that the world was created with chesed? Why is chesed singled out when we know that the 7 days of creation correspond to the 7 emotional attributes, with the first day of creation corresponding to chesed, the second to gvura? How can the beginning of any notion of a world begin with chesed when chesed itself is already a defined creation? Please share your insights. In details, he writes, why does creation start with midas and not with mechin, intelligence, chachma bin adas? What is unique about chesed that has the ability to create? Does chesed in this case refer to chesed of Atzilus or chesed in one of the other worlds? And what are the creations of each day connected to this sphere of called chesed? Okay, so let me begin by referring you to, on this pasuk, like all Tehillim, Psalms, there's a sefer called the Rishimus of the Tzemach Tzedek on Tehillim. It's known as Yal Eir, as the first publisher of it gave that name. It's this Tehillim that Rebbe would use whenever he said Tehillim. It was like it's a thick book. It was a burgundy color. Now it's been reprinted, similar. The Tzemach Tzedek's Rishimus on Tehillim. So in this kapitel Tehillim, the Tzemach Tzedek brings two interpretations in the pasuk. The interpretation from Targum Yonason, that Yibona goes on the Elam, that the world, chesed, Elam Yibona, means the world is created with chesed. There's a second interpretation from Rashi and the Even Ezra that Yibona goes on chesed. So in order to create chesed, that the Elam Yibona chesed is the creation of chesed. That's the taich. In the Rebbe, there's two interpretations we all say in the Bar Mitzvah Maimer. The Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe Chazit, which is Isa b'Medrash Tillim, Tofresh Nun Gimel, when he turned Bar Mitzvah. It's printed in Tovshin Ches, Seif Shamam Tovshin Ches, page 273 on top, where he says, Elim Ches, Yivon Shiyaz B'zeh Beis Prishna, Echad, B'chdei Shiyisava El Mazel Yidei Midas HaChesed, the first type of Targum Yonason. In order for there to be worlds, you need Chesed. Habeish Tzrichim Livnis as Midas HaChesed. And the second is that you need to build. The Yevona goes on the Chesed. So there you have the answer to the question. The way the Eibishter created the world before there were any Midas, including Chesed, you needed the Chesed of the Eibishter to create Chesed. You needed that Chafetz Chesed. The Eibishter wanted to create something, and that's what he did. That Chesed is a Chesed that's higher than Atzilus. Then there's another Chesed that's a specific sphere associated with day one. Once you have the Chesed that created existence, including Chesed, Then you have a chesed. That chesed creates the world. So both interpretations are part of the picture. And that's everything in life that way. Like it says, tzvas b'tzvas asuya, the Pirkei Avos says. How do you make a tzvas? Pliers. So in the olden days, you made a form in the ground. You poured in hot molten lead or metal. And that's how you made it. But who made the first form? You need to have a tzvas. So the question is, who made the first tzvas? The Eibishter made it. So the same thing is here. The chesed itself is chofetz chesed. That itself has to be created. And then chesed is necessary. Chesed creates existence. So both are true. And yes, you could say one is Atzilus and one is higher than Atzilus. One chofetz chesed and Atzmusi is Baruch, that b'teva atev lehetiv, the Eibishter wanted to create a universe due to his kindness, due to his chesed. And then that chesed itself becomes the creator of the worlds themselves. So it goes both ways, and both are true. Now, the same Maimer also talks about Meichin. As we see with ourselves, Meichin is a level that you contemplate for yourself. You don't need other people to think. On the contrary, other people will disturb you, will involve you. So Midas refers to how the divine manifests in having a relationship. To love something, Ava, Chesed. Gvura is a different type of relationship. Like he says in the Maimer that Avram Avinu was mistayer when he didn't see guests because it's Chesed. Moichin doesn't have that, doesn't have relationship. So even though you need intellect to create existence, but it's a creation according to the plan of the intellect. But the relationship that you need in existence, that's the chesed element of it. So I hope that answers the question. And as I said, I gave you some of the sources to look up. And both are necessary, as I said, both cheseds are necessary. Okay. Let's move over now to the essays. 3 essays as usual. Essay number 1 is Nature Unmasked by Vayeshev Klein, age 21, Los Angeles Smicha program in Los Angeles, California. So his top focus is man's journey to success often seems to be fraught with obstacles and challenges. Inspiration is confronted by icy winds of cynicism, and the road to growth is replete with bumps and potholes. Why indeed do we have to encounter such difficulties? This essay will explore the Chassidus perspective on all of reality and earthly occurrences, which will give the Jew the necessary insight to imbue him with the alacrity and joy needed to overcome the obstacles of life. Basically goes to the type idea of dira b'tachtenim, the purpose of the world, and how that dira b'tachtenim, knowing that we are critical in fulfilling the process of the dira b'tachtenim, and that for that to be the case, we have to be, the divine hand has to be concealed. So our challenges are direct outgrowth of the concealment. That is what gives us strength to deal with every particular challenge. To look past the facade of nature, as he puts it, and see the infinite God vested within it. Very nice essay, and more elaborate, obviously, than I'm saying it, but it's about finding that type of strength, calm, and relaxation based on the purpose. He gives a few good analogies about businessmen or shliach in situations where they're desperate, and then recognizing that that desperation is part of the purpose of creating a dira b'tachtenim. Okay. Next essay, Confidence from Within by Mendel Erlenwine, 18 years old, Temchet Mimim, Brooklyn, New York. And this individual also focuses on dira b'tachtenim, one of the most well-known concepts, but has been repeated so many times, he says, that you take it for granted, you don't even really think about it. In this essay, I'd like to cast the concept of dira b'tachtenim in a new light and share a valuable lesson in self-confidence that I've personally learned from it. And he talks about himself in a very personal way throughout the essay, and how he was down and did not feel the confidence, but then understanding what Hashem gave us a task, how it helped him rebuild confidence. So again, a personal essay, applying Chassidus, and applying it to personal life, how each of us has given us a corner of the world to refine, which builds the confidence that we should have in doing that work. It compares it to some of the other methods out there in the secular world of boosting self-confidence, not negating them, but saying without this element of sense of mission and purpose, we're lacking a tremendous dimension. The next and final essay for today will be Chassidic coaching. What is true power? And this is by Maria Maria Pugach, 24 years old, MP Design, Rechavat, Israel. And asked that question, what is true power? Is it money? Is it influence? Is it other material things? And defining true power is like what the Mishnah says, Chassidus explains, your inner power. Discusses the Rebbetzin and her inner power and the feminine inner power, but essentially what true power is in the context of Chassidus. So beautifully written, nicely done. And with that we conclude with the essays, and we conclude with this episode. So I want to wish everyone again a good Yud Tes on the Shana Teva, B'Teres Chassidus or B'Limud Chassidus, the two different nuschayos I mentioned earlier, or B'Darkei Chassidus, Tikasevu v'Sichasemu. We should be blessed with the chesed that the 7 generations of the Rabbeim gave us, starting with the Alter Rebbe and all that he went through. And as the Rebbe Rashab says, it's difficult to say, but you could say Yud Tes Kislev was al derech zayis k'sheketchneitzei meitzi shmane. That a zayis, an olive, when you press it, it releases its oil. And the pressing, the pressure, the challenge, which at the time was obviously very painful. During that period in time, the Alter Rebbe said the 53 days in prison brought out the shemen shebetera, the shemen that we're lighting shortly in Hanukkah, the primis atera, and each subsequent generation added to that. And we are zeicha, the merit to be the soldiers, and have benefited from 7 generations, 218 years. Yad Chassidim al Yena, Chassidim's hand it dominates, that we have the ability and the power to spread Chassidus, to illuminate the world with Chassidus, to apply it to our lives, to other people's lives, and to truly create the revolution necessary, as the Baal Shem Tov heard from the Mashiach, as Osimad da Malka Mashiach with Yefutzu Menesecha Chutza, to finish the last specks, the last drop of it, and we should be Zechadis Yud Tes Kislev, the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema, everybody fabring well, and bring it to the Achlotas Tevis, and please share with me any ideas and thoughts that you have in this regard, how we can continue to bring the spreading Chassidus to the world, to our communities, to everywhere we can reach. So good Yud Tes, good Yud Tes, and good Yud Tes. And until next Sunday, this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. A good Yud Tes.